Okay, welcome and thanks for joining us. I'm Louise and I'm Program Manager with Tangent Trinity's Ideas Workspace, which means I design, develop and deliver on a suite of innovation, learning and development initiatives. I'm also a certified personal leadership and executive coach, in addition to being a corporate wellbeing coach. So I'll be hosting today's roundtable discussion on what makes a future-ready innovation leader. So I suppose to set the context before we start our discussion, as part of a new Executive Breakout program that Tangent are launching this year, this topic is of course at the top of the agenda. And we're absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to bring together some really inspiring change and leadership consultants, strategists, and coaches for today's discussion. So I think it's fair to say that although innovation has been a driver of sustainable competitive advantage for many years, the challenges of the current pandemic have really created a new urgency. It's absolutely certain that it is innovative organizations and indeed innovative people that are best equipped to survive and indeed thrive. And this is by their sheer ability to pivot today's challenges and problems into tomorrow's opportunities. But how can organizations become more innovative and indeed individuals, especially in these really complex and uncertain times where they face new and evolving challenges such as remote working and dispersed teams, increasing internal and external demands, such pressures now in our supply chain and continuously changing goalposts. So for businesses to succeed and survive, surely conditions for cultivating an innovation environment, they have to be right. And this is where leadership skills come into play. So today, we are absolutely delighted we're joined by the most amazing panel of experts in this space to discuss just what these leadership skills are and what they look like, and how indeed they can make a difference to you as leaders, to your teams, and indeed your organizations and your customers and your business environment. Absolutely delighted to be joined by our panel, which consists of Jonathan Bannister, Dr. Regina Vogel, Conor McDonough, Steve Rowling and Geraldine Bracken today with us. Jonathan, can I ask you please to commence with the introductions? Hi, Jonathan. I think you're on mute there.
There you go. You see, we do
all the practice,
and 2 years and a year in, and I still managed to do that. Sorry, all. I'm Jonathan. I'm the founder of Make Happy, and I am a workshop designer and facilitator and a strategist. And the strategist is really business strategy and creativity. Do you need more, or is that?
That's perfect. Thank you. Regina.
Okay.
How are you today?
I'm good. So I'm the co-founder of Choose Leadership, and I come from the innovation space where I spent many years, first as a manager, and then creating and delivering leadership programs for individual leaders and teams. And there I noticed just how important coaching is, and that got me finally to become an executive coach. And I got to say, I still really enjoy working with leaders who want to create meaningful change in business, society, and for themselves. And that's kind of my sweet spot where I'm working now.
Thank you so much, Regina. How are you today, Conor?
I am good. Good, excited to be here, and yeah, excited to be presenting with everyone else. My background is I've co-founded with Regina Choose Leadership. I've been working and living in Ireland now for about 22, 23 years. My background is very much in the learning and development space, and specifically I support purpose-driven leaders to make powerful choices in service of their vision.
Amazing. Geraldine.
Hi Louise, I'm delighted to be here as well. I'm Geraldine Bracken and I'm a qualified executive coach and mentor. And I've extensive experience in leadership and team development. I specialise really in technology-led assessments, which allows participants to really deeply explore and develop an insights on themselves, which enables them to grow as leaders. So I work mostly with corporate clients across many industry sectors in Ireland and in North America. And I've also delivered previous coaching aspects of tangent leadership programs in the past year. So delighted.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Geraldine. And is Steve on board yet?
Nope.
I don't think so. Okay, we wait for Steve to join. So we just might kick off our panel discussion now, if that's okay with everybody. So Jonathan, I have you in the hot seat. Can we start with you, if that's okay? Could you, Jonathan, we'd be really interested to hear your insights. Perhaps you could sum up the key leadership skills you believe drive successful innovation, and indeed how an individual's approach can impact the outcome.
Okay, good question. And I suppose the first tip is put your microphone on, otherwise it's quite difficult to drive innovation. You'd have thought I'd have learnt 12 months in. I think for success, a successful leader has to first of all identify within their organization and within the territories that they are competing in, where is going to be fertile ground to drive innovation. So, you know, you've got to be looking, you've got to have that radar out to see what's coming. I think you have to embolden your team to take risks. And I know that in some of the pre-discussion we were having, we're going to be talking about how organizations allow people to fail and, you know, and things like that. So I know some of the other panelists will be talking about that. But, you know, do you allow your team to explore bold ideas, to go out, you know, to go out there and to really challenge? I think they also need to protect the team. I'm working with an organization that has actually set up for the first time ever an innovation unit, because within the organization, there's a slight worry that innovation is a bit messy and sticky, and what do they do? And so that, you know, they're trying it small to start with a small group, but the leadership team have to protect that group. You know, there is nothing people hate more than a radical idea. You know, you've probably had it time and time again in your organization where people go, that's not what we do around here. And I think leaders have to allow that sort of thinking. And again, for me, it's when you're doing the divergent thinking, anything goes. And when you bring it back into the convergent thinking is when you start to make some decisions. And as a slight aside, someone put a post up on LinkedIn today, and they copied me on it, and they said something about bad ideas and, you know, how awful bad ideas are. And I know that, I'm pretty sure they did it to see if I would react. And I've been sitting all day trying to type and thinking, no, I'm coming to do this talk, so I won't. But you know, it's an interesting mindset, isn't it? That if a leader goes, there's a bad idea around, why would anyone stick their head above a parapet? Why would you risk doing that? There's always going to be a time in an innovation cycle to start surfacing the best ideas. So a lot of what I think strong leaders need to do is that they need to be looking forward to protect the team. So I think those are some of the key skills that, you know, that I want. It's that thing about also when to coach and when to be an advocate. And I think the second part of your question was around how your approach to innovation, Louise, you know, and that's something that I've been very interested since I met Dr. Min Ambassador about 15 years ago in the States, and he's done a lot of work on people's preferences on gaining information and using information. And some people have a very strong preference, as you can probably imagine in the way I'm presenting now. I'm very experiential. I love being, you know, experiencing it. I find sitting there and reading books, you know, quite a challenge. You know, I like to be sort of in there. Other people, luckily my business partner, Sophie, totally different to me. My energy goes through the roof in the divergent thinking phase. I love the sort of the ambiguity, giving ideas out. My energy plummets when I have to start bringing it together. And I think that understanding of how you approach using your knowledge, gaining your knowledge, and how you that works with other people is absolutely key. And I've seen so many conversations which seem to crash, but it's only because people are it's not that they're actually disagreeing over the ideas, it's more about where people's energy are going up and down. So a lot of the work that we'll be looking at doing on this is helping people become more aware of their own approach and their team's approach.
And Jonathan, just if I could impress on you, we would love to hear, is driving an innovation culture within an organization, is that the remit of the leaders? Like, should they own it? Or indeed, should this be driven by maybe a dedicated team or another individual or a department? So I suppose what I'm asking you is, where is this ownership? How can it be divested, or should it be? And how can leaders, how can they be the effective change agents? Maybe just give us a quick overview.
I mean, I think there's a huge body of research that shows that a diversity of approaches, a diversity of ideas leads to better ideas. And this idea of having a sort of a single lone genius in a business is probably very dangerous. So I would hope that organizations allow everybody to start to think of new ideas, start to bring those ideas through. I do think you need somebody who tells the narrative, who tells the story about why is this important for you as an individual to get involved, for your team, for your division, for the business, and why are we bothering to do this in the bigger sense? And I know that some of the other speakers are going to be talking about purpose and things like that. So I think I like it to be culturally spread, though I do believe that you have to have some flag bearers who are willing to go, this is how we, this is how we behave, this is what we do, and especially in organizations where maybe they haven't embraced that sort of thinking to start with. Did that answer, did I help there?
That is amazing, Jonathan. And I'm just going to move on to Connor, but while we do that, Jonathan, would you mind we just putting in the chat, we just had a request or an ask from Linda. Can you put the name of that ambassador that influenced you and on the in I suppose stimulating this amazing energy in people? So if you could maybe just respond to that. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We'll be back to you again. Connor, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Connor, your legacy is also in leadership, but also in coaching. We have heard you speak so many times about the overcoming resistance to change and creating this inclusive environment for the team. How do you guys help leaders, I guess, affect this cultural change in developing an inclusive innovation culture? Any advice to our listeners?
I guess the first thing, Louise, is to ask the question, why are they in fact resisting? Is it a fear of loss of competence, a fear of loss of routine, a fear of loss of relationship, maybe a fear of loss of identity? But the interesting thing is, if you ask people why they're resisting, they're likely not going to tell you, which you might make up as another form of passive resistance. But I think what leaders experience as resistance to change is often a symptom for the employee of an absence of psychological safety. So for us, psychological safety simply refers to a belief or a feeling that you're not going to be punished or marginalized for making mistakes, or indeed just for speaking up with questions, with ideas or concerns. And in fact, the four questions that people tend to want to have answered in terms of asking, am I safe, is, do I feel like I belong? Which means, do I get to show up fully here? Second of all, they want to be able to say, do I get to make mistakes and learn? Thirdly, does my contribution matter? And then finally, can I challenge the status quo? Because interestingly, resistance can come from fear, but it can also come from resentment or alienation from the organization. It can come from attachment to what was in the past. And it can also come from a genuine resistance because of a different view or perspective on the efficacy of a particular idea, change, or an innovation. So what we do is support leaders to become inclusive so that people don't have to just fit in to the status quo. And that means both embracing kind of a surface diversity, but also embracing a much deeper diversity. Because what an inclusive leader really does is they value difference. An inclusive leader is someone who's going to get curious, someone who's going to ask questions to uncover the uniqueness of their team. Because it's really easy for us to make assumptions that everyone has had the same experiences that we've had. So one of the things to keep in mind is that an inclusive leader is going to ensure that difference is part of their team. They're going to recruit for it, they're going to select for it, and they're going to promote it. But I think the greatest benefit of an inclusive leader is that it enables them to work with those who are out of the system and those who can kind of reveal its patterns and its behaviors. There's a story of 6 blind men who were in a village. And one day they discovered that there was going to be an elephant in their village. So they went off to see the elephant because they'd never seen one before. The first one grabbed its tail and kind of went, an elephant's like a whip. Another one touched the trunk and said, no, an elephant is like a hose. Someone else touched the side of the elephant and said, no, it's like a wall. Someone else the leg and kind of said, no, it's like a tree trunk. Somebody else the ear and said, nah, it's very much like a palm tree. The 6 said, no, they touched the spear and thought it was like touched and thought it was like a spear. And for us, the elephant is the system. Our job is to discover the system through different perspectives, and the possibility of innovation arises when you find those new perspectives. And that's what we support leaders to do.
Thank you so much, Conor. And Conor, as a fellow coach, my understanding is that a co-active environment, it creates transformative conversations, offering us unique ways to listen, I suppose, to raise awareness, to make choices, to make those difficult decisions. Can you tell us a little bit more about the co-active leadership model, and I guess what benefits that they can present to individual leaders in adapting to changing environments?
Okay, here's the 3.5-minute version. I guess it's the idea that one-dimensional leadership models no longer really fit the constantly changing context in which leaders operate. I guess it's the old idea is that I'm afraid that if I let go of the schlitter, I'm going to lose control because it's going to fall. But what if I was able to let go of the schlitter and the ball doesn't fall? Because that every leader's fear is that they're going to drop the ball. So what we do with coactive leadership, first of all, it's a relational model, and it really involves collaboration in service of purpose. The co refers to relationship, and the active refers to being in action. And for us, it's the whole idea that leadership is about taking responsibility for your world. From a coactive perspective, that means it starts with self, then it becomes about another, and then the next level is many others. And that many others can be at the team, the organization, the community, or even at a societal level. So there's a story told of the earthquake in 1989 in San Francisco. And involves a couple who used to drive home a particular way every day. And they would often pass a homeless man at an intersection. And on this evening of the earthquake, streets were very, very busy. Highways had collapsed. They came to the same intersection they had always passed. And they noticed this homeless man was up in the middle of the intersection directing traffic, sending people this way, getting people to stop, getting them turning, and traffic was flowing. And for us, that's the essence of leadership, not just because they took responsibility for their world, but they answered the fundamental leadership question, which is, what is needed in this moment? And he realized what is needed in this moment is somebody to direct traffic, not because someone gave him the job or he was in the hierarchy, but he just took responsibility for doing it. So for us, it's that there's a critical belief that leaders are about not just taking responsibility, but they're able to go about doing so. So the model that we work with, there's a traditional piece of the leader inside, which helps to connect leaders to their sense of purpose and their sense of choice. There's a leader in front, which is all about connecting to vision and relationship. The leader behind, which is all about coaching and service. What makes this model unique is that there's a leader beside who really brings the special focus on partnership. Really ask the question, how can we create much deeper synergy here and serve the creation of that synergy? It's all about co-creation. And what's most unique about the coactive leadership model is the leader in the field. The leader who kind of says, okay, on a deep, deep level, what's required here? From a place of stillness, from a place of curiosity. And that the leader connects not just to their intuition, but connects to the possibility of innovation and says, what's possible here. So for us, to sum up, leadership, that's something that happens in a conversation, that happens in a coactive conversation. Mm-hmm. It's something that can't be taught. It can only be learned. So part of what we bring to the program is going to be an experiential approach to how do you experiment with leadership? How do you test? How do you lean in? And how do you discover something new about your leadership that you didn't have available to you before?
Thanks a million, Connor. I think that's so interesting that we don't always necessarily have to lead, as you say, from the front. It could be from behind, in the field. I think that's really inspiring to many of us, I suppose, in building these high performance teams, that we all have the propensity to be like true leaders. Thank you so much. Regina, we are hearing so much about this word VUCA.
Yeah.
So navigating VUCA, it's something that I know you guys have been helping leaders with for a long time within your own practice. Would you mind sharing with us and with our listeners what does VUCA mean, for example, and what does it mean to the day-to-day activities of a leader, and particularly in navigating change, uncertainty, and also that they may have a brief for driving innovation within their team and organization?
Thanks. Well, first of all, VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think for me, the short version of that is the leader, the VUCA leader, has to make decisions very quickly without having the information, because, you know, everything changes too fast and we just don't get all the information anymore. So what's really, really important, therefore, is that the VUCA leader is anchored in purpose and values. You know, they're like, you know, when the sea is stormy, that's really kind of an anchor, and that's where they can ground their decisions in. And I believe, because, you know, you also want to motivate your people, inspire your people, what's really important here is that they then also communicate that. What is their purpose? What is their values? And what they do by that is really building trust, because they invite those who work with them and for them to actually measure them by their own yardstick, like, do you walk the talk? And I guess that trust really replaces the trust that the old leader was able to imbue in people by just being confident and having all the answers. But the VUCA leader can't do that. They know all they have is powerful questions. The third one is that they need to lead with a vision. They need to inspire with a clear, basically like a destination postcard, and they need to communicate that really, really clearly. And fourth, they need to align others, like the daily business of the VUCA leader is really to align others around the vision and the goals. So you already hear there's a lot of communication in here. Communication really is key. And that also means that, you know, having communicated the vision and now we've set goals together, you don't leave a meeting saying, okay, everybody got that, let's go. It's what you do is you use powerful open questions to invite contributions. Like, what question could that be? What does this mean in the context of what we are trying to do here? Or how could we be wrong about this? What are alternatives? So you see, there we come back to the inclusive leader, like who invites different perceptions and perspectives. And that's really so important. It's basically even inviting people to disagree and bringing something completely different. And then a very, very hard thing for most people is to then listen. And I mean, really listen. And listening means with curiosity and without judgment. And were you going to say something?
No, that's fine, Regina.
Yeah,
no, I
okay.
was just, thank you so much. No, I just wanted to share with you that we got a comment in from Colm. Colm, thank you so much. A really, really good point. And picking up, I think, on what you said, Connor, what's needed is in the moment. And it's a really good point. And Colm is just sharing that even though vision is important, in his view, too many leaders, perhaps they hide behind their vision. and that I think we all agree leadership, it really needs to be fluid and adaptive to the past, present, and future. So thanks a million, Colin, for that. Regina, I just have another question, please, before we just move over to Steve, if that's okay. We've all heard about self-awareness, the importance of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and I think we all agree that it is a major attribute to becoming truly an influential leader. So we're really curious. Do you think that anyone, or that all of us, can become more emotionally aware to become this altruistic leader? And how, very quickly, maybe just share, how can we achieve that?
So let me create a little bridge to the comment about vision before. The first thing is self-awareness. And I think vision is important, but not those glossy vision statements that we see on corporate websites. But self-awareness really is about deeply being connected to your own purpose and values. But it also incorporates what is my usual emotional response to the world out there? Like, am I more the angry person or the anxious one? And what actually triggers me? So that honesty with oneself. And then again, it's the candor of actually sharing that and the walking the talk. Emotional awareness, absolutely everybody can build that. And what that means is to build a vocabulary of my own emotional landscape. And when I coach a leader and I ask for the first time, how do you feel? They tell me a story about what they think, or they say that was crap, and then they move on. So it requires openness. But why is it so very important to actually go there? Only when you know yourself can you notice emotional triggers and behaviors in others and have that compassion. That I wouldn't say an altruistic leader, I would say a compassionate leader. And right now there's so much fear and anxiety and overwhelm out there. If you don't have the capacity to actually notice where you are fearful or where you are overwhelmed, you can't have the empathy for others, and leaders need to help their teams cope. I just want to finish with a figure here. The Leadership Circle Profile Group, they've done a study based on thousands and thousands of leaders. And they found out that 70% of managers manage with more reactive behavior than actually creative behavior. And those come in 3 different ways. They are the complying people, they need to be liked. They are the controlling people, they need to get results. And they're the protecting people, and they need to look smart. And if you can't shed that identity of I have to look smart at all times, you're always going to be protecting, and that means you're reactive. And that means you're not actually a leader, because leadership is a creative act. And that's why it's so important to do that work.
Thanks a million, Regina. And I think what I'm taking away from this is that it really does take courage, doesn't it, to be a leader? And as you say, to invite feedback, but there's positives. The benefits are that it makes you this more authentic leader with integrity, with that knowledge of or awareness of how you behave and indeed how others behave. And I suppose to navigate that and to get the best out of your teams. So thank you so much, guys, for sharing that with us. Steve Rowling, how are you doing today?
I am very well, thank you, Louise. Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you. And we have Steve beaming in from the UK, if you didn't recognise by his lovely accent. So Steve, we are going to talk about storytelling. And we are very curious. And I know we have spoken a lot about, as indeed our panel, about authenticity and how important it is in leadership. And that indeed a team really recognize this and thrive within that environment of integrity and authenticity and trust. But it's just one attribute, Steve, isn't it, in becoming truly this influential innovation leader. So as a former journalist with the BBC, your own background, it's absolutely steeped in this mastery of storytelling. We would love to hear from you, and if you could share, what are the benefits of this art and mastery of storytelling to leaders?
I think the main benefit is how you connect to other people, and how you see the world and how you explain the world. And the simplest way, there's a reason why we've been telling stories for 50,000 years. If you go back to sort of cave paintings and so they're stories, it's a very, very old behavior. And there's a very good reason why. It's the most effective way we've found of passing social information from person to person. So story is what you go to when you've finished work, as in you pick up a book, you sit down with a DVD box set, you get on the phone, you go on social media. That's where you want to be. You want to be in a world where you're telling stories. They're the things we remember. They're the things that get our attention. And so when you think about it from a leadership point of view, particularly around leading around innovation, so not just business as usual, but something new in Regina's world of the VUCA world of unpredictability, it's really important that you can explain clearly what you're trying to do, and that people can see what you mean. Story is very, very useful. We kind of understand the world as if it's a story. We understand other people as if they're stories. I'll give you a little example. About 2 years ago, I was in Trinity, and I was working with a group of academics, helping them explain their work to a non-academic audience, to a general audience. And so we're in this room with all these very, very bright people. And I was going around saying, so what's your area of specialism? And one of the people in the room was an assistant professor. And she was in her kind of late 20s, early 30s, I'm guessing. And I said, what's your subject? And she said, immunology. I study vaccination and viruses. So great, she's very busy right now. And I said, okay, so can I ask you a personal question? Have you got any kids? And she said, yeah, I've got a little boy who's 3 years old. I said, okay, I'm going to ask you another personal question. Has he been vaccinated? And she said, oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, what's interesting is if she'd said, no, he hasn't been vaccinated, she's still an expert. She's still got a PhD. She's still a professor. She's still, right? She's got all the facts and all the arguments, but you wouldn't believe a word she said, because as a character in the story, she's stepped out of character, and therefore her credibility would be destroyed, because to Regina's point, she hasn't walked the walk. She's talking the talk, she's not walking the walk. That comes out in story. It's also really interesting, Connor, you told two stories. One very, very simple, like there's a ball in my hand. If I do that, it stays put. If I do that, it falls. That's a little story. And then you told us the story about the homeless guy at the traffic, directing traffic. They're little stories. And what stories do that facts don't is that stories start a little movie playing in your head. And so it's very interesting. This phrase translates into lots of different languages. We say to people, I see what you mean. Like, we actually see the movie. None of us were there in Los Angeles, San Francisco. Where was it, the earthquake, San Francisco? Yeah, none of us were there. None of us have met that homeless guy, right? But we can all see him.
Sure.
That's what stories do. Stories start a movie playing in your head. So if you need to explain the world, you need to explain your position, you need to explain your values, you need to explain your leadership, your strategy, whatever it is you need to explain, you need to take people with you as a leader. You have to tell a story. Now, not always. There are certain times where stories are the wrong thing to do, but lots of times, like if you have to announce redundancies in a company, right, you don't walk into the meeting of people and say, I'm going to tell you a story about a guy who was made redundant. And you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened. Because everyone's just sitting there going, what? There's redundancies. Tell us so when you've got bad news to deliver, you just have to be very straight with people. But yeah, that's why stories work.
And Steve, is there, like, say for our emerging and existing leaders, is there a particular style or type of storyteller that the leader can adopt? Like,
yeah,
have you any advice there? How do we shift into that mode of storytelling to persuade and influence and negotiate?
Well, the answer is the style you should adopt is your style.
Okay.
The style you should not adopt is something you've seen on a TED talk. or
Interesting.
some person you've seen on a webinar, you should adopt your own and develop your own style. Whether that means so I've got two groups of European clients. I've got a group of Irish clients I work with at Trinity. I've got a group of Estonian clients I work with in companies in Estonia. Estonians are quite quiet people, right? Estonian engineers are very quiet. Irish people are a bit noisier sometimes. Okay. So there's a bit more extrovert, a bit more introvert. Doesn't matter. You have to be authentic. You
Sure.
cannot put on a show. And so people can tell when you're clicking into presentation mode. They can tell when they're being told a story. And you have to be very careful. There's a time and place for that. So if you're standing up in front of a conference, or, do you remember those? If you're standing up in front of a room full of people, then people expect you to put on a show.
Sure.
They do not expect that if you're having a conversation with them. And if you click into a rehearsed story,
yes,
got to be careful. Got to be careful.
Thanks a million, Steve. That's really good. And it's very comforting to know that we just have to be ourselves, like the best version of ourselves. But I think we have an advantage. We have the most amazing advantage, competitive advantage, in that Ireland is a nation of storytellers. So there you go.
Yep. And also, don't underestimate the power of the English language. It is a nation of English language speakers as well, and very well educated and.
Thank you so much, Steve. Geraldine, can I move over to you, please?
Yes.
Geraldine, you have a brilliant legacy in leadership and executive coaching, and indeed career development coaching. And again, it's said that coaching, it's fundamentally a conversation, isn't it? Or a series of conversations between the coach and the coachee being the individual. But I guess different to normal conversations, coaching, it's the impact that conversation has on the individual. Can you define for us and for our listeners, what is coaching, and how does coaching support the transformation of emerging and existing leaders on top of, say, leadership development training? So how do those two tenets wed each other, coaching and leadership training? And how is it an extra benefit in accelerating that leader to be an innovation leader?
Yes, absolutely, sure, Louise. I suppose the one thing it's not, that sometimes it gets a bit confused with, it's not just the chats. We're not just having the chats. It's got to be a lot more, the relationship has to be more structured than that. So I think really it's about setting goals. So we've talked about all these wonderful things and what we'd like leadership to be, but we really need to be able to get, my passion, I guess, is getting people from A to B. I haven't succeeded if I haven't seen some change and I haven't seen some movement. So it's about setting the goal for where the person is right now, today, at this point in time, is very, very important, as the others have said already. And really checking with the coachee, how realistic is that goal at this point in time? So the conversation around the reality of the goal, it needs to be clear up front as well. So I think there are a lot of styles and models of coaching out there. But for me, and what I've had, I suppose, the most success with really is sort of the technology-led assessment piece, which is really around enjoyment theory and what people really enjoy doing. Yes, so it is important to understand that and really bring them through sort of a journey at the beginning to really get to grips with their own traits and their own behaviors. And if they understand that from a starting point, you really are, it's fantastic, because the emotional intelligence starts to lift from there. Everything starts to lift from there. So it allows participants to be starting with that knowledge, and then the real conversations start to happen. And what I find a lot with people is that sometimes perhaps traits that they're low on, they might tend to demonize those traits a little bit. So say somebody who's very frank says, diplomacy is rubbish. We don't need diplomacy. So they'll start by demonizing that trait. And until you can reframe diplomacy as part of it, an advantage to them as a leader, can they even want to start working on it at that point in time? So the first thing is to sort of don't allow the demonization of the traits that they're low on. Because once they see the benefit of the improvement, they'll be much more engaged in actually taking charge of their own development. But then I think you really need to get into setting the SMART goals at this point in time. So what's that going to look like? So if you're developing diplomacy, Louise, what's going to happen at your next meeting? You know, what's that going to look like? How are how are you going to be different? And you need to come back next week and tell me how you got on, you know, and did you try it? But here's the difficult part for the coach. You at that point in time have to hold the coachee accountable. So you can't let them off the hook and say, oh, well, I didn't try it or it didn't work or whatever. Otherwise, really, that is really crucial to coaching and for moving people from A to B, is that you hold them accountable for doing it. Even if it's a failure, it doesn't matter if it didn't go so well, but it will have uncovered their fear of going down the diplomatic route, for example, in that case. And you know, to Steve's point, storytelling is also really powerful in the coaching relationship. So I can share stories about myself, what I might find difficult, or even sharing stories of another guy who was frank in another organization and the pain that he had was, you know, whatever. And people, oh, really? You know, so they don't feel so alone in that. So that's for me, because coaching can be a little bit different. There is a personal style that's involved here. As Steve says, you've got to be authentic to your own style.
And Geraldine, say for emerging leaders who may not have built up that bank of experience as our more established leaders, how do they face a different set of challenges in becoming that innovation leader? And indeed, how would coaching help them?
Yeah.
How will coaching support their transformation?
Yeah, I think enormously, really, Louise. For the last year, working with emerging leaders, for me, it's been eye-opening, really. They've faced a lot of challenges. Some of them got promoted during lockdown. They're trying to manage teams in lockdown remotely. They're trying to onboard teams, and they're trying to support young staff that may be in themselves stressed. So like resilience and managing stress is crucial for the emerging leader at the moment. And even last year, I did the Tangent Workplace Wellness postgrad, and that's really become a part of the coaching relationship a lot in the last year. You know, how are you getting on? How's your team getting on? How are you coping with this? So that's been a big challenge, I think, for a lot of emerging leaders in the last year. But the challenges they face within the organization is sometimes their own managers are not open to innovation. They're like, oh, let's just get it done the way it is. So if they're dealing with a manager who's not open to innovation, and they and their teams are very innovative, you've got to encourage and enable them to have the conversations with their leader. And actually, it's not enough to say, well, my leader doesn't buy into it. They need to be able to, I suppose, influence their leader of the benefit of that change, and that it's not just change for the sake of change, that it's really going to bring value. And I think that's one where the coaching can really help them. And one that was very common last year with emerging leaders was they said, you know, I used to be really collaborative as part of a team. And when I became a leader, I felt that maybe I shouldn't be, the team might think that if I'm collaborating and asking their opinion, that I don't know the answer myself. And as an emerging leader, I should know the answer. So while they were very collaborative as a team member, now as emerging leader, they were like, oh the onus is on me to maybe not collaborate and come to the table with a decision. So I think that has been a challenge. And I think Regina said that communication skills are crucial, absolutely crucial across the board. And I think for the emerging leader, planning and organizing skills working remotely have become quite crucial. We can't have the conversation in the kitchen or the coffee area anymore. We have to plan to have these conversations. So I suppose, you know, emerging leaders have had a lot on their hands. And I think the coaching relationship is a sounding board for them. can, where they can actually begin to realize and be able to reframe, I suppose, the conversations that they need to have with their managers on the one hand, and with their teams and their junior employees on another hand. So that's some, maybe not all, but some of the issues for the emerging leader in this innovative situation. But again, with the program and the Executive Breakout program, it is getting through that, sitting down, making the SMART goals with them so that they can actually be able to be empowered to do that.
Thanks, Geraldine. And I think you've reminded us that we shouldn't be alone. Leaders, they don't have to make these decisions alone. And creative collaboration is so beneficial to supporting the leader in making those decisions, those complex decisions, and understanding the impact that those decisions have on their team or their organization, which leads me into you, Jonathan. So again, speaking of innovation, design thinking, Jonathan, it's such a powerful method of solving these complex, wicked problems, about pivoting challenges and problems into perhaps recognizing new opportunities. And essentially, it does help, Jonathan, doesn't it, inform decision-making. So we're curious, how can this approach be adopted by the future innovation leader in implementing an action plan? So it's all great, Jonathan, being creative, having these wonderful ideas, but how does that leader, that innovation leader, implement, and how can they use design thinking, for example?
We'll start with design thinking. We'll see whether this counts, Steve, as a proper story. This time last year, I was looking at a summer of workshops. At that stage, we tended to open conferences using Lego Serious Play, and I had a book of work over the summer. And I think it was probably almost to the day this year that the phone began to ring, and various clients began to ring up and go, Jonathan, and I said, you don't have to go any further. I know exactly where you're going. And I lost everything. And had you asked me a year ago, do I want to do workshops like this online? I would have gone no. You know, I normally get my energy from bringing people together and running a workshop like that. But it went literally from full speed to crash. And in the end, I could have sat there and probably done a summer of gardening and enjoyed having teenage children at home, which, you know, has its ups and downs. But actually, we employed design thinking as a way of going, can we get our business up and going again? And it's a creative problem solving process that's very, very sort of human centric. So we started by finding out how were people coping. All the people that I had workshops with, how are they running workshops now with their people? How are they engaging their people working from home? Was it problems with technology? Was it problems with the way, you know, just people feeling lonely? So we went out and we just spoke to people. We also did a shed load of work on some of the tech that was out there to go, what can we learn about ways of making this more engaging? So, you know, we spoke to people. I'm a member of the IAF, the International Association of Facilitators. And you can imagine, as a group of people, there's never been a group of people whose work suddenly fell off a cliff like the IAF, because a lot of us do it face to face. So we started to share information. We gathered, we gathered sort of ideas of what other people were trying. We defined the problem, which is that this is going to be a new way of working, and, you know, people would need inspiration. We then generated ideas, and I work with somebody who I normally teach every summer at a course in the States. David and I decided to go, you know, what can we do together? And that was actually amazing. Suddenly we had a method where we could start to test ideas. And we put together some workshops, which we then just offered clients for free. So in some ways we had prototyped. We went from our ideas, we went into prototyping, and we tested workshop after workshop with previous clients saying, look, you're probably fed up of another escape room. Yeah, I'm sorry for all of those people, anybody out there who's sort of running escape rooms, but, you know, a lot of people have done a lot of escape rooms. And we started to offer other things. and we made them better, and we iterated and we iterated. Luckily, we lived our system. And the result is I ran more workshops in January and February than I've ever run before. So as a system, we've had the best 2 months we've ever had in my business in 11 years and 2 months of Make Happy. And that came out of following a system. We could have gone, oh no, but we went to a process. And that's what I think is so fantastic about design thinking as a process, which basically is another way of creative problem solving. And I don't know if any of your, the people out there have seen, the World Economic Forum published their Future of Jobs report for 2025 last October. Interestingly, they changed some of the definitions of the previous 2 reports, which I think was a bit weird. But number 1 in skills that they're saying is analytical thinking and innovation, reading off here. Number 2, active learning and learning strategies. Number 3, complex problem solving. If you go to any school in the UK, you go to any school in Ireland, we don't teach people a process to solve problems. We do all this fantastic education and we send them out with GCSEs or A-levels and your equivalent. They go to university and then you go, do you have a process for solving problems? And people sit there going, well, I know, we don't teach it. And that's why it takes away so much of the things that the other panelists have been talking about, that ambiguity. If you can fall back into a process that you can follow, not rigidly that you never deviate, but it gives you the steps to take even the most terrifying problems and start to break them down. So, my passion, if of all the things I teach, is just teaching people, as I started with, what's your preference for problem solving? What's your team's preference for problem solving? And then giving them a framework to approach any problem is wonderfully powerful. Wonderfully powerful. Steve, did that count as a story which, give me some marks out of 10?
It does, and I can even tell you which story it is. It's the story of a man, called The Story of a Man in a Hole, because you're kind of minding your own business, pandemic comes, you get knocked into a hole, but you climb out. And what I think is really interesting is anybody can fall into a hole, but nobody can fall out of one.
Right, thank you. And yes, and to build on your analogy there was a stage last summer, which I'm sure for a lot of the people listening and maybe even some of the panelists, when that hole looked very deep. And again, I suppose coming back, Louise, to your question, that this idea of following a process, following this process of design thinking, which I can't wait to take people through, is so empowering as a way of actually going, I will find a way of either building a ladder or digging handholds to get out of this, because we'll go through and very much like Regina was saying, in the course, this is going to be practical. I want people to bring real problems, and we are going to try this for real, and on stuff. So you leave with some tools and techniques that you can apply immediately back to your home life, dealing with teenage children, or work.
Thanks a million, Jonathan. And it's really encouraging. I mean, it's really encouraging to get an insight that you as entrepreneurs and practitioners, that you are adopting the design thinking approach indeed in, I suppose, pivoting and responding to change yourselves. And Jonathan, you've just shared, and I know all of you guys are the same, that we are a testament, and that it's such a powerful process. And we look forward to hearing more from that, Jonathan, when we do embark on Executive Breakout. So we just have a couple of minutes left, maybe just 1 or 2. And I would love to invite perhaps Geraldine or Regina just to comment. We all are coming across this word about agility, and that it was or is, it's like a superpower, how to navigate change, pivot our leadership style, adapt to team environments, and I suppose helping us to thrive and survive and innovate. So before we go, what do you ladies believe the new superpower for leading innovation could be? Regina, can maybe ask you first. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I want to, like at NASA, I always like that story. At NASA, when they have a new rocket launch, an unmanned rocket, and then at launch, the rocket explodes, the senior leaders all clap their hands. And what they do is they applaud and reward trying something more, going higher. So I believe that the superpower for innovation leaders really is to paint that destination postcard and then step out of the way and simply create that space to experiment, fail, and learn through learning loops. And then to coach people so that they can actually step up as you as the leader steps out of the way.
Thanks, Regina. Geraldine, have you any thoughts?
Yeah, much like Regina, I really believe growth mindset for organizations and leaders is crucial. And, you know, we've heard a lot about it in the last, I suppose, 5 years, maybe 8 years, but you still go out there, and I guess I'm still quite shocked sometimes at there are still a lot of blame, you know, cultures out there. It's still not okay to make mistakes. And sometimes, so I think that level of committed leadership is extremely important. Mistakes are okay and we will learn from them. And that the security, I think at the beginning that Jonathan talked about, or perhaps it was Connor, the safety element, the psychological safety in organizations. It has to exist for people to be able to grow in those environments. So I do think growth mindset and agility, not everybody is as flexible and agile, and we forget that sometimes as well.
Sure.
And it's nothing to do with age. You know, even some of the very younger candidates I work with, sometimes, you know, they're quite rigidly organized because they find security in that. So I think that's where the coaching can be very empowering to measure where somebody is at and to say, okay, these are the traits and qualities that we need for the future. So how can we pivot over there? So, you know, that's sort of, is it a superpower? And I don't think we can just have maybe one superpower, but I think we can have a competency or a little toolbox that we could start to develop and put some of these things into the toolbox to allow us pivot to be those innovative future leaders.
Thanks so much, Geraldine. And I think, again, it just reminds me of the courage, you know, that leaders have or need to cultivate. And indeed, there is a huge body of knowledge out there around the benefits of the learning organization and learning from failure. And thank you for reminding us about that, guys. So we are coming to a close. And before we completely close out, I just wanted to conclude by thanking all of our panelists so much for joining us on today's session, which will be the first part of an executive breakout session in our innovation series. Also, I hope you found it thought-provoking and motivating. I certainly did, and I learned a lot. And just to say to you, to hear more about our Executive Breakout program, which we will be delivering this May, and you'll get a chance and an opportunity to meet our wonderful maestros again on this program, Regina, Connor, Jonathan, Steve, and Geraldine. And I think one of my colleagues is going to just submit a link to an expression of interest form. So please, we would encourage you to just submit an expression if you're curious. We would be delighted to have a chat with you and tell you more about our program. Also, if there's any questions that we haven't got around to, please do put them in the chat and we will absolutely undertake to reply to those by following up post-session. So guys, thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.